I'll hide this guy. See if we can. Good morning. Okay, get that all set up. Hello, hello. Good morning. Welcome to my studio. It's still a little messy. I was sewing this morning. Oopsie. All the cuddle everywhere. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sew Together Tuesday. We are here today doing our little elephant. Can you see them both? Let me see if I can move them. Here we go. Dee-dee. This is our little elephant that we're doing today. This is the Ellie Elephant. So we're going to talk a little bit about stuffed animals and how to sew toys. And then we're going to work on sewing one of these guys together. So we're going to take 3 days to do this project because usually when I do this class, it's a 6-hour class. So we're going to take some time to do it. But I just want to make sure that everybody is here. You've got your fabric, you got your pattern. If you haven't gotten a pattern, you can get it from funkyfriendsfactory.com. It's the Ellie Elephant pattern, and you can get it there. You can get it sometimes at shops. So we have a couple of places that we'll list for shops where you can get them if you haven't gotten your pattern yet. And then we'll go from there. All right? Is everything good? Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, yeah. So thanks for joining us. I hope that you are happy and healthy and you're here to sew with us. I'm pretty excited about it. Let us know I'm going to put this guy away. Let us know in the comments where you're coming from or where you're, where you are. Where's your home? Because you're probably home too, just like us. So let us know where you're from, your city and state, and at the end we will have a drawing and we will have a prize. So that's the way that you're going to enter, is by leaving your city and state. Okay. Also, make sure that you leave any comments or questions that you have. I'm here with my partner, and he is manning the camera, and will totally let me know if you guys have questions. So, if you haven't made stuffed animals before, they're kind of a whole different beast. So if you're a quilter, this is a completely different thing. Like, it's so 3D. It's really interesting. So sometimes people have a hard time going from quilting to clothing construction and that sort of thing, or bags, because it's 3D. I will say that doing the stuffed animals is completely different from that, even because it doesn't really even look like it's going to look like until you're finished. So it's a whole different process if you haven't done them before. Okay. All right. So make sure I've got everything. Okay, so let's talk about what we've got, what I'm sewing with. So this is my little sample that I have. So this guy I made, this last weekend I made him. He is made out of our Luxe Cuddle sorbet in Mystic, if I remember right. We have a whole bunch of new sorbets that are out there. They are hard to find, we have found. So they're pretty new on the market. So not a lot of stores have them in stock right now. So we'll have some stores that we'll list, and if you are a store watching and you have it, please make a comment and let us know, because this is one that people have wanted. If you can't find it in stores now, you can make it with another one and make this one later, because these are pretty fun. It turned out much cuter than I thought it might. So when I had the fabric and I wasn't really sure, yeah, the fabric's up here. Let me grab it. These are the fabrics that I used. So when I had the fabric, I wasn't really sure how it would work. Sometimes it's really hard to know what it will look like from the fabric that you have, and I hadn't made any that were like print at all, so I wasn't really sure, but it turned out super duper cute. I'm really happy with it. I've also used the Cuddle 3 for the ears and for the tusks, so if you don't have scraps of that, you can use cotton or you could use fleece, but the Cuddle works really well, and we'll talk a little bit about why the different fabrics work better or differently. Okay. So this is just Cuddle in white, and this, I forgot again. I can't remember. I don't remember the color. Sorry. Ellen will post it because I told her what it was. It's one of our purples. Jewel, maybe? I think it might be Jewel. Anyway, it went really well with this, and I had a scrap of it. So those are my little scraps. That's all I did, was just pick the stuff that I had here in my studio that I had enough of. It takes about a half of a yard for this guy at 120%. Okay? All right, do we have any questions yet? We're good? Okay. All right, so this is the Ellie Elephant. It's a pattern from Funky Friends Factory. So some of you probably are joining us from her. She shared it on her Facebook page, and I think in her newsletter. So some of you What was that? Is Jewel? Okay. So some of you might be joining us from her site. Funky Friends Factory is a great pattern company. Her name is Pauline, who runs it, who designs all the patterns. And I'm amazed every time when I look at these pattern pieces and I realize like that becomes this. So like if you can see, if you can move the camera hawk so like they can see like all of these pattern pieces like become this, which to me is a three-dimensional thing that I don't understand the logic of from here to here and how it sits up, and she does these cute little things. So like this is another one of hers. Whoops, my fabric's gonna fall. This is the little lion. This is Larry, I think is his name. He's super cute, and just the whole construction of it is just so good. So anyway, her patterns are available through independent shops and through her website. So we have a list of places. So let me tell you some of the places that have her patterns, because after this, you're going to want to get more of the patterns because they are really, really good. And she has, I don't even know, 25, 50 different patterns. She has a lot of different patterns for different animals. She's based in Australia, Tasmania now, I think is where she lives. But anyway, she's down under. And so she's got a whole bunch of really interesting animals too. As well as like all of the ones that we know here in America. Okay, so patterns, where you can find patterns. So Urban Spools in Dallas, Texas. Sew It Up Bernina in Hurst, Texas. Old Alley Quilt Shop in Sherber, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, Minnesota. Okay. Sewing Arts in Santa Monica, California. Fox Cities in Appleton has the patterns. Time Flies Quilt and Sew in Degani, Michigan. She has a bunch of the patterns. And and then, okay, so that's it for all of the patterns. So you will want to get her patterns as well as on her site. So the most comprehensive is obviously on her site, but definitely check out your local quilt shops. We want them to keep shipping stuff out. And a lot of those have our fabric as well. Some of them have eyes, and we'll talk about the eyes in a little bit. But let me tell you really quick who has eyes, because Urban Spool does, Old Alley, Cali Quilt Co. up in Sacramento, and Time Flies in Nagani. They all have eyes, okay? So you'll want to get those. Those are the little plastic safety eyes. If you don't have those eyes, you could use just embroidery stitches, but the eyes, having the little plastic eyes really makes a huge difference. This one is, these are a little bit bigger. So in the pattern, it calls for 12 millimeter. I think these are 15 millimeter eyes. So I chose a little bit bigger in this sample. I'll use the 12 millimeter in the sample I'm doing today. Okay. All right. So that's some information on where to get the pattern, where to get the eyes, and then of course the fabric at your local quilt shop who has lots of fabric. And we'll give you some other places later where you can find more of the fabric. Okay, so this is the pattern. I downloaded it from the website. Okay, if you missed our little video that I did the other day, I talked about how to upsize the pattern, and so that you can find on YouTube and all that sort of stuff. So this is the pattern. This is the Ellie Elephant. It comes with all of the pages, tells you how to put it together, and then it's going to have all of the pages in the back that are patterned. You can see on mine is a very well-loved pattern. I have traced this at least 25 times. So I have made my pattern, I enlarged it to 120%, then I taped it together, I cut everything out, and then I actually just used packing tape, or what do you call it? Packing tape, is that the right word for it? Just packing tape over the top of it, so it's basically laminated at this point, so it's a little hardier because I've had to copy it a lot of times, so you can see all my crazy tracings. But this works really well. So that's what I have with mine, is 120%. I've also got my little eyeballs here. Okay, and then I cut out all of my tusks and the double ears. So you want to do your ears in both the inside fabric and the outside fabric, and then the tusks I did in the white cuddle. Okay, everything else is in this Luxe Cuddle hide. And did we decide what color it was?
Blush.
Is it blush?
Yes.
Okay, it's a really lovely baby pink color. I really like it. So I've made the gray one, I've made a blue one, I made this psychedelic purple blue one. So I decided I would make a pink one because I thought that would be fun. Okay, so I've got all of my pieces. I've cut them out. Like I said, if you missed the video, you can go back and watch that, because basically what I do is I enlarge the pattern, trace around everything, and you can see on the back of everything I've traced it, and then I cut it out. Okay, and you can cut it out with the little scissors. So these are my Karen K. Buckley's little perfect scissors. You can use the little Femores. You want to use some little micro serrated scissors, okay, to cut these out. If you feel like you know the blade well enough, you have some practice, that's what I use, is just the blade that I love so much, to cut these out. It is a little bit harder because cutting the curves and stuff like that with the blade is just a little funkier, okay? Any of the Cuddle 3, so like for the ears and that sort of thing, I just use regular scissors and cut them out, and it works beautifully, okay? All right, so we got everything cut. I've got my pins, I'm gonna need those. I have my stiletto because I love it so much. My little scissors, and I'm gonna use a 9014 stretch needle as always. I'm gonna use the polyester thread, so I've got, I don't remember what brand I have today. I have some polyester thread today. We generally use Mettler or Superior thread. So you just want to make sure that you're using a polyester. So we've got those, okay? So do we have any questions I need to answer before we get started? We're good? All right. Okay. So don't forget to leave your city and state so we can draw a winner at the end. And please feel free to ask any questions. Okay, so I'm going to set this guy to the side. There's some things I want to tell you about him later, but we'll get to that later. Okay? All right. So in her pattern, I will tell you, her pattern is written really, really well. And it's very clear if you take your time with it. Like I said, today we're going to take our time for this project. We're going to actually take 3 days to do it so that we have plenty of time to work through it. It can be a little intense. So it's not terrible by any stretch, but it's a whole other thing. So if you haven't made stuffed animals before, it can be a little intimidating. So we're going to work through it just a little bit at a time. And by the end, you'll have a little stuffed animal. It'll be great. Okay. I do have to say, I've done this class, I think maybe 4 or 5 times that I've done it. We did it just recently at Road to California, and we did it also at Sewing Arts out in Santa Monica once. And it was super fun because I always ask people, like, who are you making it for? Because you usually come and you have somebody that you're making this little stuffed animal for, and a lot of times it's, a grandchild. And by the end of class, 99% of the time, it's for the person who made it. So they decide to keep it. So when you do this, just assume that you're going to keep it for yourself. Practice one for you. And then if you love it, you can make it for grandbabies. It's so cute. And like I said, this one is at 120%. You could make it bigger. So you could make it at 150 or 200. We have one at the office that we made that is, I think, at 400%. Somebody could correct me, but it's this tall. It's huge elephant, and it's great. So you can totally make them whatever size you want to. Just make sure that you're getting larger eyes would be the biggest thing. All right, so let's get started. So first what we're going to do is we're going to start with the head, and we're going to start with the ears. Okay, so we're going to get the head all together. So I'm going to get my pieces, which would include my head and my ears. Okay, so this is where we're going to start. Okay, so I've got my head. You can see I've labeled everything. So when I trace this, I make sure to take all of these marks. Keep your pattern close because you might forget some of them. And so you'll have to go back and find them, remark them. So this is like for the eye. This is for the ear. This is for the tusk. I don't mark that part here. One, because I know what it is, but also it's just a lot. But you'll notice I marked on this with a black Sharpie, and you can't see it from the other side. So don't worry about that. The only time I find it showing through it all is if you use a white or a very light yellow. Okay, but even with this light pink, it doesn't show through it all. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is put our little ears together. So we want to put them in pairs of our inside ears and outside ears. Okay, so that would be this part and this part is what we're doing. Okay, this is the inside ear, this is the outside ear. That's why I'm going to refer to those. Okay, so this is my inside ear. I've put it on the fabric so that it pets right. When you look at the pattern, it'll show you the way that the nap should go. This pattern has been so well loved. So this is the way the nap should go. So make sure that you're looking at that when you're putting it on your pattern, okay? And then you can see I traced this and I've just folded this down and then I trace the back of it and flip it back up. So I obviously have used it a lot. Okay, but it's worn really well. Okay, so I'm gonna put these guys together. Okay, right sides together. Because these are two different kinds of fabrics, you can see that this nap just totally hangs over the edge. I don't really care about that right now. I can go back and fix that later with my stiletto and pull it out. But for now, I just want to make sure that those raw edges will basically match. Okay, so if you have been at our Sew Together Tuesdays before, you know that I like to pin parallel and I like to do a double row of pins. We are not going to do that today. So today there's a few things about working with sewing the stuffed animal patterns. It's a little bit different than sewing Cuddle for the blankets or the quilts. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to pin a little further apart, and then I'm going to come back in and repin. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is make sure that I can see my raw edges there and that they're together. Okay, and I just want to get these so that they're basically even, and then I'll come back and I'll repin. Okay, so we're still going to use a ton of pins, just in a little bit different way. Okay, so I'm going to pin here, and now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to pin in between here. What I have found is that I want to pin in not very far. Okay, so I mostly have, most of my pin is hanging off of the fabric, and then some of it is in. Okay, and I'm going to use that to my advantage because I can use it to basically steer while I'm sewing this. Okay, and we're going to pin a lot. You'll notice that sometimes it won't be totally even, and that's fine. We're going to stick it in there because we're using the Luxe Cuddle, which likes to hide all of our mistakes. Thank goodness. We can let it be a little bit off, and it will totally fit in there okay. Okay, so I'm just kind of looking down the side, and you can see that those edges are basically even though I have all this fluff off the side. Okay, so you can see I pin a lot. Okay, this will help you in the end because if you don't pin a lot, it gives it all sorts of opportunities to move. We don't really want that. Okay, so I'm actually going to pin both of these ears and then we can sew them. So you can see it's a ton of pins. Okay, and I'm using my clover pins because they're the ones I like the best. Okay, thankfully I have a few on my little circle pin cushion, which I like a lot. So yeah, these are the they're flower head pins, which are really great. So I'm going to just pin it inch or 2 inches apart at first, and then I'll come back in and repin. Okay, and I sort of just check it as I go, make sure I'm getting things right. Like when you're working with Cuddle in other areas, you kind of want to make sure that you're getting basically endpoints. So I'm trying to look for the certain curves in here and making those curves match, and then I'll go back in between and catch them all. Okay, so it's just like when we do the strips, and I do the center and then the end and the end, and then I fidget it in. That's all I'm doing here is that same sort of thing. Okay. Okay, so the pins are really the thing that makes it work. You'll also notice it holds it down fairly flat because I've got so many in there. Okay, those inner ears too, you can do those out of cotton if you want to, but it will lay differently. So, I mean, I'll have a sample for you tomorrow. It's all done out of Cuddle 3. I was trying to finish it this morning, but it didn't work. So I'll show you guys tomorrow what it looks like out of Cuddle 3. The pattern is originally written for cotton fabric, which is why it would be at the 100% would work at cotton fabric. In Cuddle fabric, it doesn't really work as well because it's just so thick and it becomes more difficult to work with. So now that we've got this all together, so now I'm just going to go pin these. So my machine, I've got my machine set up. It's with the polyester thread, and I'm going to leave it at a smaller stitch length than I normally do. So normally when I'm working with Cuddle, I will up my stitch length to a 3.5. I'm going to actually leave it at a 2.5 this time because I want it to do a smaller stitch length. So it's still straight, still in the middle. I did want to show you guys this thing here. It's this little pin, if you can get in here. This is why we don't sew over pins, Okay, so this was me not being quick enough to get it out, and you should have, oh, I'm glad you didn't hear the way the machine kind of yelled at me. I was worried for a second. So don't sew over your pins, and I'm going to be very careful not to sew over them today because it can be a real problem. Okay, so I'm going to grab my stiletto just in case I need it. I like to use my hands a little bit more for this. There'll be certain points that I will use it, but I do use my hands a little more for this. So I want to make sure that when I'm getting this in, my needle is not going to come down before the fabric. I'm going to put it in just a little bit. Okay, I found that this makes a big difference in being able to not have it eat your fabric. Okay, I will tell you that this happens sometimes, that it will eat your fabric. Okay, we're also doing it at a 1/4 inch, which is this line on my foot is my 1/4 inch. The pattern originally calls for a 1/4 inch. Now, if we blow it up to 120%, our 1/4 inch is a little bit bigger. It doesn't matter. It just gives us a little bit of, like, the 1/4 inch seam allowance should be bigger, but it doesn't matter. I still use the 1/4 inch, and then it just gives me some wiggle room. Okay, so I'm going to knot my fabric here, and then I'm going to take just a stitch or two back and then get it to go forward. Okay. Okay, so this is what I did yesterday, and then I started going too fast and I totally caught that pin in there. So don't do it. So you'll notice when I'm sewing this, I'm going to kind of keep this taut because I want it to feed in there. So for me, when I'm doing this and I have so many pins, it's harder for me to handle the stiletto. So I just use the pins in my fingers. But I want to keep that nice and tight. You'll see that I will do this a lot where I'll lift up the foot and I'll move things around as we come around tight corners. And there are going to be a few on this guy. Okay.
You're using the walking foot, right?
I am. I'm using the digital dual feed walking foot on my baby lock. So if you have, you know, just a regular walking foot, that's what you want to use. So these corners, I'm going to take them nice and slowly because I want them to be fairly smooth. I will show you. There'll be a few places they aren't, and it'll be okay. Okay. So I'm going to come up here and back stitch. Okay, I'm going to take this out. I'm going to check the back, okay, and I can see it's pretty smooth. Did all right. It caught the whole thing, and that's what's important is we catch all the edges. So you can see my seam allowance got a little bigger there. We don't really care, okay? So now we're going to do the other one. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put it in so that my needle will go into the fabric. I'm not going to hit a pin first. Okay. Back stitch just a little so I can try to catch that edge, and then I'm going to go around this tight little corner. Okay, and I can kind of hold those pins to, like, sort of like I said, steer around it. I just want to make sure I'm taking them out before my needle gets there, but not too early. That's the trick, is you got to leave them in there as long as you can. Okay. I'm going to get that as flat as possible as it's coming through here. So one of the perks about doing this with the Luxe Cuddle is that if we don't get these seams perfectly straight, it's going to hide in there. You won't be able to tell. If you get any little puckers, you won't be able to tell. You don't have to fix it. It's kind of nice. So if you do this with cotton, you end up having to make sure that that 1/4 inch seam is really, really perfect, and that your curves are really perfect, because otherwise you'll see it. Okay, so we'll do the same thing here. I'll look at it, check, make sure I caught everything. Yep, I pulled that up a little bit. It's fine. Okay, all right, so then we're going to come over here. Okay, and I'm going to grab my smaller magnets so I can keep those things off my machine a little bit. Okay, so now I've got my ears sewn together. So one thing that I have realized is that if I don't clip this, it doesn't turn quite as nicely. So most of the time we can go without clipping things. So I'm not going to clip any of these curves here. I'm just going to flip them. This one here, I want to clip it. Okay, and I want to clip it just almost to the thread, but not quite through it. Okay. And normally you would just use the tip of your scissors like this. These guys have been well loved, and I need to get them sharpened so the tips don't work as well as I like them to. So I have to cut in a little bit. Okay, but if you do it with just the tip of your scissors, it's a lot safer. Okay, so now I can take this and I can stick my finger in there. I can just draw this all the way around and you can see it totally fine, okay? Ta-da! Okay, so there's ear 1. And here's ear 2. Oh, look what happened, guys. Da-da-da. Okay, I have to go back and stitch that. I don't even know how that, oh, look it. So this is what happened. So this is why like we check everything. So when I was sewing, this flipped over and I sewed it right along there. So on here, my stitches are there. Over here, it got pulled over. So we're going to go back over and I'm going to stitch that down. Okay. So every seam that you do, when we're doing these in class, I make a big deal about it because every seam, you're going to want to check it. It's really easy to miss things. And so we're just going to double check everything that we do. And still at the end, there will be times that I have to go back and hand stitch things because I've missed it. Okay. Okay. All right. That should have caught it. Let's give that a try again. Yeah, that worked. Okay, so now we're just going to flip that all the way out. Flip that. And now you can see how this curve comes out a little bit better, okay? Because I clipped that curve and so it heads this direction. All right, so now what I do is I'm going to take a pin and in here, okay, I'm going to get my little lines lined up. Okay, you can see either side of them together. I'm going to get them lined up. Get the raw edges together and I'm going to pin through that line. Okay, so once I do that, that's my fold line. In this pink, I can actually see it just a little bit there, okay, which actually works out to my advantage because then I'm just going to fold it right on here and I'm going to pin it in place. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other ear. And I'm going to find where those lines are. Oops. Look at that, I forgot it on that one. See, not perfect. Okay, and I'm going to pin it right along there. And I'm going to fold that down. So these raw edges should match, and I'll have all of my edges matching. One of the things that I actually kind of like about using the Sharpie pen is that I can see those edges really nicely. And they're all going to get hidden in the seams. So it doesn't matter that you can see them. All right, so now we're going to take this back to the machine because I want to baste these down. Okay, so I'm going to put this on a big zigzag. So my big 5-5 zigzag because I want to baste these in place. Okay, I'm going to fidget this because I want that to pull tight underneath. Okay, and now I'm going to stick this in here and I'm going to get just the edge. So my machine, and your machine probably too, has a little extra thing where if you pull the presser foot lever in the back, I can make my foot go up even higher. Okay. Okay, so that's all I'm doing here is getting it to come up just a little bit more. I can get this under there better rather than fighting with it. Okay, and I'm just going to put that along the edge and I'm just going to baste this in place. So I'm going to do a nice big wide zigzag, just gets it flat. Okay, and holds it in place. So you don't have to do this, you could just pin it, but I don't want to. I want it to be nice and flat. Okay, and then I don't have to think about it again to see if the ear has unfolded or anything. Okay, all right. Doing all right out there in question land? Mm-hmm. Is everybody telling us where they live?
Yep.
Oh, good.
Right. Yep.
Good, good. All right, so now I'm going to trim that because I don't like my threads. Okay, so now I've got my ears. I've got 2 ears, okay. Ta-da, there we go. Okay, so now we're going to attach them to the head. So the head is kind of funky and it gets confusing for people. So I'm going to take just my one side. We'll do one side at a time. Now I want my ear, so you don't want to get your ears on backwards. I want my ear to flip forward. So if this is the face, I want the ear to be like this if I'm looking at the front of it, okay? I told you before, I'm a very visual learner, so I have to like double check things like this all the time for myself, okay? That's the way I want it. If I put the other ear on, it's gonna be like this, which is wrong, okay? I wanna see the inside of the ear from the front. So then I'm just gonna stick it on there, right sides together, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line up this top line first, okay? So sometimes that bottom line won't match. We'll see what happens here. And I don't really care too much. I do want it to line up here because you want the ears to end up fairly even. So this one, you can see my ears didn't end up perfectly even. Okay, so here I've got like an inch, and here I've got like an 1.25 inch difference. In the end, you can't really tell the difference. It's fine, okay? But from the top, I can see there's a difference, all right? And that's because I wasn't super careful with checking, all right? So see, even I don't always do it right. Okay, so then we're going to come and I'm just going to pull this down. So this is something that needs to be managed. So you're going to pull that so it's nice and flat and get these raw edges together. Okay, because we only have 1/4 inch seam allowance, and normally when we're sewing with Cuddle, we want a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We give ourselves plenty of wiggle room, but we don't with this pattern, because a 1/2 inch seam allowance means we have to really futz with the pattern, and it doesn't make it any easier to sew actually. But we do want to make sure that we're catching all of those edges in there, okay? So the other thing we need to do is when we're sewing this, we need to make sure that we're not catching this in there. Okay, so make sure that that gets pushed aside. If you're having a little bit of trouble with that, you can totally just pin it out of the way. Okay, so it's gonna move back because we're gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Okay, so I'll put the other ear on and then we'll sew them both. So this is gonna go the same way. Here's my face, my trunk. My ear is gonna go on just like this so that you can see the ear from the front. Okay. I'll line up that line with the top of the ear. Okay, and I'm trying to line it up with the top, the fold there, and not the top fuzz, the nap. Okay, because it'll go up higher. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing here, kind of pull that out. And it's pretty close to matching. What happens, and what happened on the other one, is that I folded one ear down further than the other, so it ended up being smaller. So you can double check that. I obviously haven't found that it matters that much. Okay, so now we got the same thing. I'm going to sew right along that edge. This is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to do it a little bit longer than it needs to be. Oops, sorry. Okay, I'm going to do it a little bit longer than it needs to be, just so that it can all hold in check. Okay, and that when I do that 1/4 inch seam allowance for the other part, oh, we got to switch it back. Okay, that it will catch in there. Okay. Okay, so when it's going over this and it's a lot of layers, you're going to notice that your machine wants to kind of bog down, and you'll notice there'll be a few times that I'm going to kind of just rank it around. I'll have to push it, I'll have to pull it. We'll make it work. Okay, come up here. I'm going to go past that just a little bit, back stitch just a tiny, clip my thread, and we'll do the next ear. Okay, I prefer to sew it from this side. What was that?
In the Funky Friends photo tutorial, it's the head pieces A to B. It says to put those together first. Is there a reason you do the ears first?
I just prefer to. It's just my personal preference. You can absolutely sew around that. That's what we'll do next. So I just do the ears. I sew them on. One of the things that I tend to do is that I like to sort of batch sew. So her pattern, I will tell you that her pattern, the way that it goes together, absolutely works, and I don't have a problem doing it that way. It's just personal sewing how I like to do it, really. So it's not that I think that this is necessarily the better way, it's just my habits. Okay. Okay, so now we've got the ears, the head. Okay, so we've got the two of them. They're actually going to sew together this direction. Okay, and she does, Pauline has a bunch of video or photo tutorials on her blog. So if you go to her website and you get any of her patterns, there's also lots of information on putting them together. And she talks about how to do them with Cuddle as well. She does a lot with our fabrics. Okay, so now I've got my two head pieces and I'm going to pin them together. Okay, I'm going to flop these ears out so that they're out of the way. That would be the thing that changes, is if you sew this head part together first, you don't end up having these ears in your way. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pin this all the way around. And I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to sort of pin them far apart, and then I'll come back in and pin in between. Okay, so up there I can see that it'll work together nicely. Down here I'm going to kind of fidget a little. Okay, and I'm going to work the other direction because I want these little nose bits to fit together nicely. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that those curves are matching. Give myself some more pins. Okay, so I'm going to pin, like I said, every inch or so, and then I'll come back and a pin in between. I'm so glad somebody was reading the directions too. It's always nice. I tell you, there are sometimes, me too, that I don't read the instructions and I think I'm going to do really well, and then I don't. Her instructions are really well written though, so like I said, read them. Okay, and following the letters, one of the things to remember that's really important about working with these patterns is those letters make a big difference. So make sure that you write those on there, because she will talk about, in the pattern it says to sew from A to B, which means from A all the way around to B. All right, if you don't write those numbers or those letters down there, it gets very confusing as to what is being talked about. Okay. So I'm going to put a couple extra pins down here at the curve because that's where it will sort of get out of sorts for me. Okay, and then I'm going to add a few more pins up at the top. Okay. So for me, this is a really fun pattern, like doing this one in classes, because honestly, once you get this part done, like we turn it and then it'll actually sort of look like an elephant already, which is great because sometimes you can work on things for a long time before it starts to look like anything. All right, so I'm going to stick this under here. I'm going to do a little lock stitch. Okay, and I'm going to get it moving. All right, and this is just the straight stitch again. Okay, with the I will say that the digital dual feed on this sometimes can get in the way when doing the stuffed animal, just because it's so big. So a walking foot tends to be a little bit easier to work with on this. You'll see where I kind of have to just struggle through it. So if you have a walking foot, it's pretty ideal for this project. Okay.
Yeah, the cameraman would like to shout out to Vicki Waldron from Xenia, Ohio. The cameraman grew up about 30 minutes south of you, and would like to see you here. Stay safe.
Okay, so we're going to come around this curve. Yeah, we like Ohio. Okay, there's actually quite a few people who've shown up from out there. There's a lot of Midwesterners, which is fine because I'm out there all the time. So next time I get out to the Midwest, I expect you guys to be in some of my classes. All right, so I'm going to get up to the B. Okay, so there I am at the line. I'm going to back stitch. I was way faster than I needed to be. All right, and then I'm going to cut my thread. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to check this, make sure I've caught everything. Okay, because it's really easy. You can see, like, there'll be places that this side gets really small, and it's fine. I just want to make sure that it actually got caught. Okay, so I'm going to do a little double check. It's great. Okay, now I can turn this inside out. We're going to turn the trunk back in, but there's something very fun about being able to turn it out and be like, oh my goodness, look, it's like a little trunk. Okay, we're getting there. We got little ears, little trunk. Okay, so now let's add its eyeballs. Okay, so that's what these little marks are on here. So I've got safety eyes here that are 12 millimeter safety eyes. There are a bunch of stores, we listed them off earlier, that have them. Hopefully they'll be listed up on the comments for places that have the eyes. So these are 12 millimeter eyes. These are a great size for it. You can also do the 15 millimeter. That's what I did before. They go up very large depending on how big you want to do it. So lots of shops have them. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little snip back here, right in the middle of that. Okay, and I'm not going to cut a hole, I'm just going to cut a little snip, because then what I'm going to do is from the front, so from here I can't see it, so basically I go from this side and I just feel for it until I find it and it pops through. Okay, so you're going to pop that all the way through till it's flat on the front, and then this little guy goes on, so it's a little hat. Okay, the hat comes down over it. And you're just going to work it until it pops on there. Sometimes it takes a sec. Come on. Oh, goodness. Let me try the other one. I'm going to say that, and this time it's not going to work at all. And I've done 800 of these eyeballs. Okay, so one of the things I found is if it's flat on the board, it helps a lot. Okay, let's do that. Doop, there we go. So I just had to get enough pressure behind it, because that's the issue, is that you're trying to work it onto it, and this is a little rolly up there because of the round eye. Okay, so now we'll put that on there. Okay. Get it on there. There we go. Okay, and then I just want to make sure that it's pushed down so that it's, yep, you can hear the little pop. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but there's a little pop that happens when it's on there all the way. That's the safety eye, because now you can't get that off. Okay, it's just in there. So if you've gotten your eyes in the wrong place, they're just going to be in the wrong place, because these eyes are, I've found, impossible to take back out. Okay, so that's the whole point, is that they are stuck in there. So if you have a little kid, the kid can't pull the eyes out. Okay, so become a not choking hazard, because that's why they're called safety eyes. Okay, so here's our little elephant head. See, so already it starts to look like something, which is great. Okay, so now we're going to put the head aside. Put it right up here, and we're going to put the body together. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the dart in the side. This gets confusing for people, so I'm going to just explain. This is the front, this is the back, so A is the front. Okay, this is a little side dart. So in the elephant, right in here, you can't really see, but there's a little side dart. Okay, you can sort of see him in here. Just a little, I can feel the dart. That's what makes him sit like this. Okay, so that's what makes it, that makes this curve around. This piece here is this piece here. Okay, so that little dart is what makes him do this instead of sitting out like this. All right. So sometimes that gets confusing for people, and I've seen them sew this together in all sorts of ways that are not right. Okay, so we're going to try to sew it together the right way. I'm going to grab my pins. Okay, we're just going to put this together so that I can start sewing at the raw edge and up to the fold. Because what we're going to do is we're going to sew this dart, and we're going to sew it straight past the end. Okay, so this gets confusing for people. We don't necessarily want to like curve in here at the end. We want to keep this nice and straight. All right, so we're going to pin that down the side. And as always, I'm going to pin it out a little bit and then pin in between. Okay, so that's something that doesn't change no matter what we're sewing with Cuddle. It's the best way to make it fit, is to pin wide, then pin narrow. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Okay, because we've got side one, side two. Just got the right and the left side. Like I was telling you with her patterns, what I'm always so impressed, because I'm like, how did she figure that out? I didn't need to have that side dart. I wouldn't have thought about that. But it totally works. This makes me extra impressed with the pattern drafting. Okay, so now I've got my pieces all pinned together, and I'm going to take them over and sew them. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to stick it in just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take that pin out so I don't go over it. I'm going to back stitch a little. Okay. And if it's struggling just a little, you can sort of use the pin to keep it to get it going, but you can also use your stiletto and sort of push it this direction. There may be points, especially when I have more layers, that I have to do that, and I'll show you. Okay, so then I'm going to sew straight off of that. Okay, I'll check that, make sure I caught everything. Yep, we'll do it again. Okay, I'm going to stick that in there. Stick it under all the way. We'll sew it one more time. Okay, and we'll come up all the way past. Do a little back stitch. You can see I do a fairly long back stitch on that because I want to make that really secure, because it's sort of a weird point that it's already been cut, and I want to make sure it stays. Okay, so now you can see it's got the little curve in it. Okay, so this actually gives it some body on the side too, just like a dart in our clothing would do, is it gives it some fullness. All right, so now we're going to put these right sides together again. Okay, so we've got them right sides together, our darts are matching, and now we've got these little lines. So I've got my A's, my lines for where I'm going to leave a hole, and the F. A is the beginning, F is at the end. Okay, so this is going to be its head, that's going to be its tail. All right, so I'm going to pin these together. And I can look through here, I can pin through here like that little quilter trick where you go through, make sure they match basically. Okay, stick it in there. Do the same thing here. Okay, where they basically match, and then I'll pin in between. Okay, so one of the things that I like to do when I have to pin a gap is that I will do a double pin. So I'll go back in there and I will add another set of pins where I want to leave that gap. Okay, and if you've been with us before, you've seen that little L thing that I do at the gaps for the turning, and I'm going to do the same thing there. Okay, if you haven't seen it before, you're about to learn something new. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to put 2 pins here and here. Those are my stop points. So this is how I can keep track of it. Okay, and I'm going to sew it from here to here, go do a little L, come back here, do the L, and sew to the end. All right, so that's what we're going to do. All right, so let's sew that. Okay, I'm going to put that in and take my pin out, do a little back stitch, go forward. Okay, I'm going to take those pins out so I don't nail them. Okay, and then I'm going to turn this and stitch it off the edge. Okay. And back stitch it, and then I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to do the same thing here. Keep my edges nice and even. Stick my needle down so it doesn't move. Okay. And then I'm going to scoot it up just a little because I want it to be basically at 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go forward, go back, and then I'm going to stop it about where I think 1/4 of an inch is. I did okay. If it's a little bit off, it's all right. You'll make it match up. You just want it to be at least close to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there. Okay, that'll allow us when we come back, and we're going to use that hole that I just left to stuff it. So that means when we come back around and we want to sew that shut, it's going to be a little easier to sew shut. Okay? All right. So now we're going to go over here. I'm going to grab my pins real quick. They can collect pretty quickly over there. All right. So now you can see our body starting to come together. Okay? So here's the outside legs, the outer legs, the body. Okay? So here's where, and I've just hand stitched that shut, and that's what we'll do at the end. So you're just going to leave that here. It's a nice easy part to do it. It doesn't have a curve really to it, so it's easy to sew together, an easy place to stuff it. All right, so that's what that is. All right, so now we're going to sew the head to the body. Okay, so on our head we made little marks. Okay, this is where people start to get really confused when we're doing this in class. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at those marks. So you can see I've got an A and a C, and I've got an A and a C here too. We're going to make those match. That's what those are for. So that's why we want to mark them, is because later we're going to use them. So she says in the pattern to sew from C to A to C, and that's what that means. Okay, so my A's are going to come up here, and I'm going to match that seam. All right. I tend to nest mine because they're so thick, and trying to keep them open is hard because I can't press them open. So I just nest them. If I'm doing it and I can just sew it open, I will, but we have 2 of them that we're sewing together, and so I just nest them. Okay, so then I'm going to pin all of this. Okay, so I'm going to make sure, so you can see this wants to curl in on itself here. It gets real easy to over sew that. So what I want to make sure is that I'm sewing from this side and that I get it nice and flat when I pin it. Okay, so that when I catch that, it's going to be flat again. All right. Okay. Now I'm going to make sure I can see my fluff. I've got a lot of it there, but here's my edge. Okay, so I want to make sure that those will match. All right, make Making sure all those match. Right here, we're going to have a lot of layers. So here is where I'm going to have to take it nice and slow. If you have to hand crank it over some of these areas, you might have to. It's a lot. You can see there's a lot of thickness in there. Okay. We're going to do the same thing over here. Okay, I'm going to get those ends to match. She might have had you sew the tusks in before too. I don't know. We're going to do that next. Just realized like, oh, I probably should have read over her instructions. I'll just do it the way I teach it in class. So if people are reading the instructions, they'd be like, but wait, she says you could do it either way, okay? I promise, either way works. Okay, so now we're going to sew this together, and I'm going to make sure that I'm sewing it, like I said, with this side up. So there's two reasons I want to do that. One, I want to make sure that this doesn't start to go over and get caught weird, because it'll add a little pucker. The other thing is I want to make sure that I'm actually sewing on or just to the left of this seam line. Okay, this is what put our ears on, so I want to make sure and catch that. All right, that's important for a couple of things. One, it just gives it, well, you won't see that seam when we turn it over, which is awesome. Also, stitching it again gives it a little bit of extra stability, particularly if you're giving it to a little one. So I wanted to have a little bit of trouble, so I just gave it a little shove there underneath. But if you're giving it to a little one who's going to carry it around by the ears, making sure that those ears are securely attached is important. Okay, nobody wants to go in and fix that later. Okay, so I'm just keeping an eye on that line, which you might not be able to see very well, but trying to keep it in check so that I am making sure that I'm sewing just to the left of it. Okay, make sure that all goes under there. So use your stiletto when you need to. Really use it as your other hand, because it'll help move things along pretty well, because you can sort of just shove it. Okay. So here too, I can actually use it to flatten and get it to work underneath a little bit easier. Okay. So there's a couple ways of using that stiletto. It's the by Annie stiletto is the one that I'm using. And I like it for instances like this because it's sandblasted, so it has a little bit of grab right there on the side, whereas some of the other ones don't have that. Okay. All right. So I can feel it's getting caught up back here. I'll unloosen it. Loosen it. Okay, back stitch. And then I'm going to check all my seams again. Okay. So now I'm going to come back over here. And I'm going to make sure that this got caught everywhere. Okay, here it got funky a little bit. So I'm going to check it from the other side and make sure it got caught. Okay, because you can see it got pulled. Okay, and I caught my seam allowance weird. So what I'm going to do, this happens, so then I'm just going to check it by giving it a little tug. Okay, that way I'll be able to see if something pops out and I can go fix it now, which makes it really easy. Okay, this one I got a pretty good match on that, which I have to say I'm proud of that one. If it doesn't match up, it's totally fine, because at the end you're going to take your little stiletto here. And if it doesn't match, nobody would ever be able to tell. Okay? So don't panic if that doesn't work out right. Okay, so now that's starting to come together. Okay, starting to look a little elephant-y, which is great. Okay, so now I'm gonna do the tusks. Okay, we're gonna take 2 of them. This is where people get a little bit confused too. Okay, there's a couple of places that are really difficult, and really it's because it's a 3D thing that is just different. Okay, so what I want to do is make sure that my tusks are going the right direction. So I'm going to put them on there like I want it to be, which I want it to go that way. Okay, so it's going to be here. This is right side up. The tusk is going toward the front. Okay, if I put this one on, it's going to go toward the back, and then it's more like a walrus. Totally wrong, right? You can see it, totally wrong. Like, okay, this is the way it's supposed to be. So now I'm going to flip that up, and I'm going to pin that on. If I can get one layer. Come on, guy. There we go. Okay, I think in the pattern she probably tells you to do this before, but I tend to do things just a little different. Okay, so I'm going to get those edges to match. So that was the one line I drew there, was for the tusk. Okay, and it should match with that other line right there. Okay, so those are the lines for the tusk. So usually I use 3 pins for this, one on either side and one in the middle, and that seems to work out okay. Okay, when it's flat areas, it's much easier. You don't have to pin too terribly much. Okay, I'm going to pin that one, and I'm going to pin this guy. So I do them in pairs. So the pair that I have left over goes either direction. The pair that I'm using goes either direction, so I know that this one will go on here. Okay, so this one's going to fit on the tusk just like that. The same way, it butts up to the corner. So this corner that you have here, it's going to butt up to that, and then over to that line. Okay. All right. Okay, and I will pin that in place, and then we'll sew those on. Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing, the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and we're not going to go over this one again. So I'm going to actually start a little bit early. So like before I get to the tusk, I'm going to start sewing. Okay, and then I want to make sure that I catch that really well, because we're not gonna catch it a second time. Okay. So I'm going to back stitch there, make sure it's secure. Okay, I can see on the other side, you see I just barely caught it. That's enough though that I'm okay. If it's much closer than that, I'd be like, oh, I probably should fix that. That's going to be all right. So I'm going to do the other one over here. Get that in there nice and flat. Okay. And then a back stitch. Make sure I've got it in there nice and secure. Okay, with Cuddle, what I have found is that if you have a really tiny seam allowance, if it's at least 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch, you're okay. Okay, because it doesn't unravel. So it won't fray out and end up exposing. So this is just a short seam allowance, but that will totally work. Okay, no big deal there. All right, so now I've got my tusks on the front. One thing that people want to do is sew those tusks together. You do not. You're not going to sew those together actually until the very end. So you're just going to have one tusk on either side and our little body. Okay, so there's that. All right, so I'm going to put these aside. These are the other 2 tusks. I'm going to use those later. And we're going to get a few things ready for tomorrow's sewing. So we're just going to work through a little bit. So today's is pretty darn easy. We're going to sew a few things together, and then tomorrow will be a little bit more of a challenge, but not too much because we're going to prep for it. Okay, so I'm going to put my patterns to the side that I don't need. What we have now is a whole bunch of legs. We have 3 legs, which gets confusing for people. Okay, but we have a back leg 1, a back leg 2, and then we have a body, a chest and a tummy. Okay, so this is the chest. I'll put that pattern on there for you to see it. The chest, the tummy, back leg 1, back leg 2, and front leg. All right, so all of these plus these tusks become a middle portion. So we have this piece. Okay, we're going to put that to the side, and then we need to create this piece. Okay, so we're going to do part of this today, so when we come back tomorrow, we can do a little bit of the more complicated sewing right away. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to sew the chest and the tummy together. So super easy. Make sure that you've transferred all of your lines, all right? So I'm going to sew these 2 together, and then we'll sew the tusks onto that. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that my center lines are matching, and my D's and my E's are matching. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make those match. Then I'm going to make my centers match. And then the other end. And then I will pin in between. Okay, these fidgety little pieces will need the extra pinning because they want to move on you. So when people talk about Cuddle having kind of a mind of its own, this is one of those places that totally comes into play. Okay, And if you're having trouble with these wanting to feed into your machine, and we'll hope that I don't have trouble with it today, but one of the things that I have found is that if I use leaders and enders of cotton, and I have the little cotton bit over here, and then I start sewing and I sew onto here, that cotton gives me something to kind of guide through the machine, which works better, okay? All right, so let's sew this together. Okay, let me get my pins off there. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this under here, and I'm going to make sure that my needle is going to come down past that edge, because what I have found is that if I try to do it before that, it just wants to eat it. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch just a little, and then I'm going to go forward. Okay, and you can see it kind of wants to eat it. So I'm going to pull it up. We're going to hope for the best. Okay, so this is when I found that I have to use my stiletto and get it to kind of work itself through. See, and I can kind of just, I don't know, shove it as, seems crueler than what I'm doing, but I'm just, you know, trying to guide it so that it will go in. I'm going to sew right around that curve, come up here, take that pin out before I sew on it, back stitch a little and come out. Okay, so sometimes those beginning seams won't get as close to the edge. So this one I didn't quite come off the edge, but if I come off the edge here, that's when it really wants to suck this down, especially because it has a tail here. So like I said, using a leader ender will help you there, but also don't be afraid to just have a little bit of extra at the end, okay? All right, so now I've got this guy. So now I'm going to sew my tusks on. What I want to do is get rid of all of these little pieces because it can become a little bit overwhelming, I guess. Okay, so this is my belly piece. Okay, that is this piece here that you can't really see. It's all of this piece here. Okay, that's what we just sewed here. So it looks a little bit funky, but you can see this is where my tusks come on. So my tusks are going to be up here. Okay, and they're going to go forward like this. All right, let me see if I can find it in the pattern how she shows you. Okay, this is what we're dealing with here. And it gets a little bit confusing because the pictures don't really look exactly like it. We're not going to worry about the sewing part yet, but this is how it's going to come together. So you can see the tusks are coming forward on this piece here. All right, so make sure that you're visually checking. If your tusks go on backwards, you won't be able to sew them together. So we're going to stick those on, and I'm just going to turn them like this. Use those little lines that are there. Butt them up. Okay, get my little lines to match, and then sew in between. Okay. All right, so I like to do them one at a time. I'm going to pin them both together, but you might find it easier to sew this and then come and pin and sew the other one so these don't get caught. Okay, but we'll just be extra careful when I'm sewing them today so we don't have to spend too much time going back and forth. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing, make sure that those lines match up. Okay, also if you're sewing from this side, you'll be much less likely to catch it and accidentally sew it down. Okay, all right, so now I've got the tusks pinned on there, so I'm going to go sew these guys down. I'm going to do the same thing here, get it to go in, back stitch just a little, and come over here, and back stitch just a little. Okay, we just get those nice and secured on there, and then I'll come around, flip that out of the way, and sew this side down. Okay, this one sews a little bit easier because we've got some extra up at the top that it's not going to try to suck it into the machine. Okay, so when that happens to you, understand that that's really pretty common. But if you are a quilter and you know what leaders and enders are, this is the time to use them in your stuffed animal making too. Okay, you get that nice and flat. Okay, so now we've got the belly piece here. So I've gotten those taken care of. What I don't want to do is make, I kind of wanted to get all of these things into more of one piece, less pieces, all of these together starts to get confusing. So that's what we're trying to do today, is to get them less. Okay, so we've got this piece. We're not going to do anything more with this today. We're not going to do anything more with this piece. This is the front leg. We'll sew those on tomorrow. Okay, and then we have our foot pads. So these are the things that we're saving for tomorrow. Now we're going to put these two legs together, and then we'll save those too. Okay, so this, I can tell it's got the G and the H, so those are going to match. All right, so I'm going to put them in that order. So basically they're going to fit together like this. All right, so I'm going to take them and I'm going to match them up and pin them and sew them. Okay. So this is where it's really important that you have made those marks, because you'll know which one is the G and the H for one thing, but also these two little dots up here are going to come in very, very handy tomorrow. Okay, so make sure that you have marked those. One of the biggest mistakes, I guess, that we have in class that happens is those marks don't get transferred, and it makes all the difference in being able to figure out how they go together, because once these become these sort of 3D pieces, they're a little bit harder to tell which direction that was supposed to go. So making those marks first when you cut them out makes a big difference. Okay, so I'm going to pin these guys together too. Get all of these pinned. So these curves are fairly similar. They're a little bit different, but not much. Okay, so I'm going to get these together, and then I'll pin that third or the fourth one in between. So I want to make sure that my ends match. If you've worked with us before, you know, like if you work from one end to the other, you're more likely to end up having a little bit of extra here. Okay, so this is starting to curve a little, and that's okay. We're going to manage it. I'll show you tomorrow how we deal with the curvy bits. We pin it a little bit differently, okay? But you can see it'll start to curve. Oh, these pins. All right. Thank God for magnets. Oh, all right. So now I'm going to stick this in here again, same way, in there a little bit. I'm going to get my stiletto just in case I have some trouble. I'm going to go forward just a little, backward just a little. Oh, yeah. Okay, and then I'm going to work my way around. You can see that this wants to pleat under here. Can you see how this is off? It's not straight. Okay, it needs to be like this. So it wants to do this. As you're sewing, make sure that you're taking the time to kind of pull it back so that these edges stay nice and even. Okay, so you'll notice that there'll be times that I kind of just shift things. So this has a big bump under here now, to get that to be flat, because this is going to be 3D. All right, so if you're used to making quilts and everything is nice and flat, that's not the way this is going to work. And so it can be a little bit intimidating when it has those little bumps and curves, but we want to keep it so that the sewing is flat, which means that the fabric might not be. Okay, so now we'll do the second one. We'll get that in there. Okay, back stitch just a little. Okay. I just want to work it, make sure that it is sewing as flat as possible. Okay, the one nice thing about Cuddle is if you do get a little pleat in there, you could take it out, but if it's just a tiny pleat, it's going to be okay. Okay, so you can see my seam allowances are different between these two sides, because that happens. All right, don't panic. Because it's Cuddle, we have a lot of flexibility with it, and it's okay. If you were doing this out of cotton, it'd be a little bit harder. So one of the things about doing it out of Cuddle is you have a lot more flexibility with your seam allowance and what it looks like and how straight your seams are and all of that good stuff. If you're doing it out of cotton, it has to be much straighter, because all of your seam lines will show if they're crooked, because you'll have a little pucker part that comes out. You also have to stuff it a lot harder if you use it with cotton. So the Cuddle gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more wiggle room, as I like to say. Okay, so now we've got our leg pieces together. So I'll reiterate this tomorrow, but this is where it gets confusing in this leg piece, is that this is the top of the leg. Okay, so these are the bottoms of the leg. It gets really hard to be able to tell that. On here there's a seam, and I can feel it's on this side. Oh, there, you can actually see it just a little bit. Okay, so this is that seam. So this is the top of the leg, the bottom of the leg. That's this piece here. Goes like this basically. All right, but it gets confusing for people because it feels like it should be wider and it's actually longer. All right, I'll show you, actually, I have it here, and this is the little one I'm doing that's just out of C3, which is our just regular Cuddle, but you can see the seams a lot better in this, which is kind of interesting. So here's the leg. This is what we're doing. This is the body. This is that leg coming off. Okay, so that's what this is. So when we're working with the leg, that's the way it's going to be. The same way here, this is the leg. The dot goes at the top. All right, so just remember that when we're working with them tomorrow. All right, do I have any questions that people need to know? We're good? Okay, so I just want to reiterate what we have for tomorrow. You can come around this side if you want to. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to work through, and so I've got my body piece, my chest and my tummy. Okay, so that's this piece here. I've got my foot pads, okay, which I've also marked. Okay, my tusks are done, the head's done, and now we've got our legs. So we've got our back leg, 1 and 2 are now sewn together into one piece, and we have our front leg. All right, so these are all the pieces that you're going to need for tomorrow's, because basically what happens, sans the foot pads, this will all get attached to here, and then we sew it together, which is just a little bit more finicky. Okay, so we're going to work through that tomorrow. This is the easy part, so work on this. If you have your fabrics, if you have the patterns, work on it tonight, bring it back tomorrow. We're going to put it together. So this is where I want you to stop. Okay, all right, so if you want to come back tomorrow, we're going to be doing it at 10 a.m. It's on the Shannon Fabrics Facebook page. We'll also have it on YouTube. So if you miss that part, if you want to participate and you don't have your fabric yet, you didn't get anything cut out, it's totally fine. We have it on YouTube about how to cut out the fabric, how to trace it, how to cut it, how to enlarge your pattern. I even told you that on there. Well, all that good stuff is on YouTube. This one will be as well. If you want to make sure that you can get notifications for when we go live, and you can ask for those notifications on the Facebook page to make sure that you are aware of when we are doing this. But we'll be back again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we'll put the belly together and the legs, and then we'll start sewing more. And then on Thursday, we'll be back again, and then we'll have a whole elephant. It'll be very exciting. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Oh, we need to pick a winner. Did we have a winner yet? I almost forgot. Okay, we're gonna get a winner. Okay, so this week we have yeah, we'll get one. Ellen will find one, I'm sure. This week we're going to do it a little bit differently, and I'm actually going to give you, well, I gave you a choice last week. I'm going to give you another choice this week. So we're going to pick a winner every day, and then on Thursday I'll tell you what you win. Exactly. So we're going to pick a winner. If you have any comments, please leave them. I will check out the comments later when we're done. So if there are any questions that you had for me that I wasn't able to answer while we were sewing, I will let you know what the answers are. Did we find something? Okay. The little, the lag is always kind of fun because I'm doing one thing, we're waiting for other people. But again, make sure that you have a Luxe Cuddle. I will show you what the Cuddle 3 is, so you may have that in your stash, and I'll show you why we want to use the Luxe Cuddle. The other thing is I'll show you a couple other patterns while we're waiting on that. So this is the hedgehog, which I told you we had other ones. So this is a great one. This is a good one for using Cuddle 3 at the bottom. This one I used our Cuddle Suede, which we don't have anymore, but the regular Cuddle will work very well for this. This is at 100%. Okay, so this is a really easy one. If you're using any of our patterns that have big pieces, you can use them at 100%. All right. Okay, so today's winner, so I will let you know exactly what you win on Thursday, all right? And I'll give you a little bit of a choice. But today's winner is Barbara Brown from Papillon, Nebraska. So Barbara Brown, congratulations, you're today's winner. You will get some variation of this elephant kit. So I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Pacific. And until then, happy sewing.